Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and I want to welcome our viewers from around the world, including those of you who are watching us right now on the portable TV app. We're really glad that you're there. I want to begin our newscast today by showing you a home that recently sold. Are you ready for this? It sold for $1 million above what the owners had listed it for. Now, I'm going to show it to you right here. There it is, okay? This is it. Take a look at this home. See that? It's nice, right? But it's not exactly the Taj Mahal. It's a 5-bedroom, 5,000 square foot home in a very nice neighborhood just outside of Washington, D.C. The owners were asking for $3.4 million. But because the house got so many offers, it ended up selling for $4.5 million, from $3.4 to $4.5 million. That, my friends, is inflation. But this is not a story that we're doing today about inflation. We did that story last week, right? What we want to do here is try and break down for you why this is happening in America. So let's start with this question. Is the problem that individual Americans have a lot of disposable income because of all the money printing that has taken place over the last year and a half? Sure, yeah. I'm not going to lie to you. That's a part of it. It's a part of it. But that's not what is actually driving up the prices. You have to understand, the real culprits are not the little guys, like individual buyers, like you, maybe, and me. It's the big guys who come in the form of hedge funds, pension funds, bank-sponsored real estate investment groups, and foreign money, interestingly enough, mostly from China. In fact, because China is buying so much American farmland, Congress is now drawing up a law to crack down and limit those purchases. And it's not just land. Chinese money is snapping up agribusiness throughout the United States, forestry, ranching, pork processing plants, and hundreds of thousands of acres nationwide. And it's not just China. The Saudis and other Gulf states have been pouring money into American real estate since the onset of this pandemic. And then, as I mentioned, there's the hedge funds. So these are investors who are so flush with cash, they are buying up entire American neighborhoods, leaving home buyers all but locked out of the American dream of owning their own home, or in the case of many Americans, not able to upgrade to something maybe a little bigger or a little better. That's what's really going on. So we're going to be drilling down on this phenomenon for you right here on the News with Rick Sanchez, where we believe it's time to do news again. All right, so here we go with what we think you will be thinking about or asking about as you watch this newscast. Are Americans being driven out of the real estate in their own country? What is the shocker that the U.S. is learning from military exercises off the coast of China? And is India really thinking about capping how many children a couple can have? India? All right, so we're going to begin today with what is looking like a growing problem for the American consumer. Prices are skyrocketing. But nowhere is it worse than the area of real estate, where Americans are being priced out by a combination of factors. NRS correspondent Faran Fronczak is joining us now. She's been looking into us throughout the day and joins us now with the factors that are at play, Faran.
Right. So let's first of all, again, kind of show you who is doing this, who is buying this. So take a look here. We've got the billionaires, we've got the hedge funds, we've got the big banks, and we've got the foreign countries, in particular China. Now, I'm going to look at an example, Rick. You had the $1 million home.
Right.
Let's look at the middle class, or for young guys like me, okay? Check out this house.
All right.
It said that this house needed a little bit of love. Look at this. It says, please do not go out on the deck. It is not safe. This is literally a hunk of junk, as they call it, okay? Take a look at more of these pictures. This house is totally needs to be redone. You've got so much problems with it, and it's one of these things. They were asking for the price of $250,000. 4 bed, 3 bath, no garage. 88 bidders came out. More than half were bigwig developers. 76 of those bidders offered straight cash. This is a house in Silver Springs, right outside of D.C. It sold for $460,000 in March of this year, 70% above the asking price.
70% above the asking price.
Let's go 4 months later, folks. Take a look at the house now. Went on the market less than 2 weeks ago. 4 months of renovations, selling for $849,000. Now a 5 bed, 3 bath, and it's going to be selling for almost 4 times the asking price. This is happening in neighborhoods across America. You have the company BlackRock, tied to the Koch brothers, buying up these homes in droves. They're private companies that get to build their wealth. The American people can't, especially my generation, the millennial generation. Do you think a single couple can buy that starter home even at $460,000 cash? We've got student debt. We've got all these other
$500,000 in cash you have to buy a home. That's crazy.
And a home that's a hunk of junk, too.
Yeah.
Now, the worst case scenario, Rick, is you've got these companies buying up cheap as much as they can. The bubble hits, the market prices drop, homeowners are left with a gigantic loan, leaving them upside down. Who do you think is going to get bailed out? 2008? It wasn't the people, it was the big banks. So then you got the Koch brothers, actually, who were talking about the eviction moratorium. Koch brothers tied with BlackRock.
Yeah.
They lobbied Congress for millions of dollars to end the eviction moratorium because they can then sweep in, buy all these houses. It's much easier to kick out a renter when they can't pay their rent versus having to go through a mortgage and having to go through lawyers and taking forever to evict them. So it's much cheaper. The same is happening with farming. You have China where it's buying up all of this land. You know, and the thing is that you hit on the great point of they're buying this land, but then they also get taxpayer subsidies. So we are going to help these foreign companies using our farms. Now, it makes it difficult for U.S. farmers to even afford land, like the young farmers, again, my age group. Then you also have these farmers that are getting ready to retire. So what's that going to do? And then you have this bill that's coming forward. It's expected to reach the House floor by the end of July, but the Senate has not yet drafted its own version. So we'll see. But this is coming, folks. It's coming.
Yeah, you know, and the picture that you paint is one that shows us that in this situation where we thought Americans would be able to take advantage of, it's not the average American who's taking advantage of this situation. It's the really, really big guys.
And you're going to be a land of corporate
owners.
Landowners, yeah.
Yeah,
Amherst
University professor Richard Wolff is joining us now. He probably has a thing or two to talk or to share with us on this topic. How did this happen? How did this situation get so out of hand where we're just now recognizing that the little guy, once again, even though he got all these subsidies, even though he got all this money from the government, all this so-called money printing, he's still getting screwed, Professor?
Well, this is a system that works that way. You can turn, you can twist, you can play this game, that game, but it has a structure, and the people at the top have learned over a century or two now that in the capitalist system, those at the top have most of the resources and the means to keep being at the top. So let me answer your question this way. The biggest single thing that is driving home prices is the fact that the government of the United States did two things. It pumped a lot of money into the economy, but it also dropped interest rates to barely above zero. And what that means is if you're a big financial institution, the kind that can go to the Fed and borrow, like a bank, like a hedge fund, etc., you can get money for practically nothing, 1/10 of 1%. Where are you going to get the investment to do with that money? What are you going to do? You can't produce goods and services because American people can't afford them. And you can't put them in the stock market anymore because you've driven that up so high that you have catastrophic anxiety like you saw in the markets today. Here's the safest place. The safest place is real estate. There's a shortage of housing. The houses weren't built during the pandemic the way they normally are. So there's a place you can go in, sweep up all the houses that are being abandoned by American middle-class folks who can't afford them anymore, turn them into rental property, which is what is happening in many, many areas, And there you have the reason why, with money this cheap, they're going to buy the house, bid it up a bit, and then make so much money off a high rental that they'll pay that back and be in the profit very soon.
With 30 seconds left, I have to ask you, it seems like Congress wants to punish China for wanting to come in and buy too much real estate, but shouldn't they also throw into that same punishment bag some of these hedge funds, for example, who aren't they hurting the American consumer just as much?
Yeah, it is. To be honest with you, Rick, it's shameful what is being said by some of our highest officials. Let me take a look at the agricultural land with you for one moment. The total ownership, according to the government by China, is 191,000 acres.
Right.
The total U.S. land owned by all foreign countries is 35 million acres. China owns less than 0.5% of the land owned by foreigners. They've been buying land in America for decades. Nobody said boo. Suddenly, we get all this noise. It's real theater. It's not serious.
Your point is a good one, especially when you consider that the Saudis and some of the other Gulf states have also come in and bought a lot more than what apparently China has bought. So it seems like a political point. Your point is well taken. Thank you again, Professor, for joining us. Let's move on to this now. As the U.S. begins another round of military exercises in the Pacific, aimed, no doubt, at sending a message to China. Here we are with China again. There's an ironic realization that has just been made having to do with U.S. drones. And here's what happened. During the Trump administration, the U.S. grounded all U.S. military drones, especially the camera drones, made with Chinese parts. Henceforth, drones would only be manufactured with all American parts. But now, according to the military's own reckoning, most of those newly made all-American drones are simply not very good. They're much less effective and much more expensive. Here is Boom Bust host Ben Swann with a closer look.
Well, Rick, in the ongoing U.S. war with China over technology, and it's a war that's been growing for several years, one of the latest battlegrounds is the issue of drone technology. Now, you probably would guess in hearing that if the United States won't buy drone technology from China and builds it itself, it's probably more expensive. And you'd be right about that. But what you may not know is that not only is that technology vastly more expensive to develop and build in the United States, it is far inferior to the Chinese drone technology. A new report indicates that one of the biggest difficulties for the United States in its effort to cut ties with Chinese drone technology is that the Pentagon has spent over $13 million in taxpayer money to create far less capable drones than the Chinese. Now, keep in mind, last year, the Trump administration grounded the entire federal government fleet of drones, many of which were made by Chinese drone leader DJI. The fear at that time was that the Chinese would have the ability to access data from every drone sold and used in the U.S. Well, flash forward to 2021, and the Biden administration has embraced this policy, which is leading to some serious consequences. Consider the fact that with the U.S. government now required to use only drones made in the USA, the government finds itself paying, get this, 8 to 14 times more for drones that don't even have 95% of the sensors found in Chinese-made models. It appears to be a major misstep as the U.S. continues to ratchet up military tensions with China. In fact, the latest example of that is taking place right now in Australia, as that country is conducting a joint exercise with the U.S. known as Tasman Sabre. The exercise runs between July 19th and August 5th, and it involves more than 17,000 troops. And as those joint exercises are underway, Australian media reports that a Chinese surveillance vessel traveled to the area to monitor the exercises. But the Australian joint exercise is just the beginning. The U.S. is also sending about 25 F-22 Raptors to join a military exercise in Guam and the Tinian Islands for Operation Pacific Iron 2021. And Rick, get this, the U.S. Pacific Air Force's commander, Ken Wilsbach, has told reporters that the U.S. has never had this many F-22 Raptors gathered in one place at one time. And clearly, these exercises aim squarely at China, as China seems to be undoubtedly paying very close attention. For the news with Rick Sanchez, I'm Ben Swann.
Good stuff, Ben. I want to underscore those numbers that Ben just threw out at us there. 8 to 14 times more expensive, 90% less effective. I mean, what's going on? What happened to Yankee ingenuity we all grew up with, right? Especially when it comes to our military. How can that be? What gives? We're going to ask John Jordan that question. He's a former Naval Intelligence Officer. This is the kind of stuff that he chews on daily. So, John Jordan, when we come back, stay right there. Don't go away. Hey, welcome back. I'm Rick Sanchez. So we wanted to make our own drones with U.S. parts, not Chinese parts. But it turns out that in so doing, our drones are nowhere near as effective as they used to be. That's a bit of a problem, right? Joining us now, former Naval Intelligence Officer John Jordan, friend of the show. What gives here, John? I mean,
friend of yours, Rick,
and friend of mine. What gives here, man? Should we be bothered as Americans by our inability to create the kind of products that our forefathers used to make, as we like to say, or what's going on?
Before we hit the panic button here, 3 things to know, Rick. First of all, the Defense Department and the U.S. government did not want to use those drones made of Chinese parts because they're afraid of Chinese malware or other software in there that would allow them to those devices, even though they're U.S. devices, to harvest data and pass it along to China. 2, when we build a new drone system, right, there's all kinds of development costs that go into that and developing new capability and building something out for the first time. And so when that happens, the first few units off the production line, their price tag is much more because the development costs are spread over much fewer units. That's what we saw with fighter planes, whether it was the F-14 in the 80s or the F-35 recently. As you build more and more, the per unit cost goes down because those big-time development costs are spread out over more units. That's accounting and the way the government does that. And then lastly, with regard to China, these drones, is that there are no secret technologies in drone. Like the company that Ben was talking about in his report, DJI, the Chinese company. The U.S. government has examples of those drones and their capabilities. So it isn't like there's some secret sauce in there which the U.S. government isn't aware, because we have physical examples that can be reverse engineered, taken apart, put back together. So there's no mystery there. Drone technology is kind of commoditized in that everybody knows what everybody else is doing because they're everywhere, and it's easy to buy or capture an example and reverse engineer and see what the other sides are doing. So unlike fighter planes or other military pieces of hardware, this stuff is all very open source.
But the problem here, by the way, good. I'm glad you took us through that explanation. It makes perfect sense. The only thing we're left, that hanging chad, so to speak, here is, why are they 90% less effective if that report from the government is correct? I mean, my gosh, that's a big delta, John.
Well, when you're dealing with the first few units that are off a production line or out of research and development, yeah, there's lots of problems with, there's oftentimes problems with them, or there's capabilities that haven't yet been perfected and built out and added to the system yet. So unless we know more about how that was quantified, that 90%, this is more than likely just teething pains of a new system, set of systems.
Good description. I appreciate it. John Jordan joining us live once again with his insight on a bit of a perplexing situation. Thank you, John. Next to China, India has the second largest population in the world. You probably knew that already if you watched this show. But with 10 babies born every 2 seconds, officials in India are now struggling to keep up with the booming population. So now India's most populous state, Uttar Pradesh, is proposing legislation that aims to limit how many kids people there, citizens there, couples there can have. This marks the second state ruled by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party to make such a proposal. RT's Trinity Chavez has more on this story.
Officials in India believe the answer to population control is implementing a 2-child policy. The proposed legislation would give couples who opt in voluntarily, they would get a cash benefit, while those who choose to have more than 2 children could have their government subsidies taken away.
Today, India on track to overtake China as the world's most populated country by 2027. And according to the United Nations, it's facing a housing crisis. Home to nearly 1.4 billion people, the northern Indian state of Uttar Pradesh is one of the world's most populated regions, with population density that has doubled the national average. Its population is even larger than most of Africa, European, and South American countries individually. So now the government of Uttar Pradesh wants to implement a two-child policy to help curb the rapidly growing population. Under the proposals, couples with more than 2 kids would not be allowed to receive government benefits or subsidies and would be barred from applying for state government jobs.
However, couples who voluntarily opt in the sterilization program will receive cash benefits like tax rebates and extra pay for government-paid jobs or subsidies on buying a house or land. Additionally, people who work for the government get even more pay benefits if they only have 1 child, like free health care and education for the child until they turn 20 years old. The chief minister for Uttar Pradesh told Indian media that there should be an adequate gap between 2 births. The new population policy is not only concerned with stabilizing population growth, but also providing a path to prosperity for every citizen. The bill says that because of the state's limited ecological and economic resources at hand, it is necessary and urgent that the provision of the basic necessities of human life are accessible to all citizens. Now, per capita, income in Uttar Pradesh is less than half the national average. Meantime, the draft bill on population control is currently open for public consultation, and from there, the bill will then be moved to the Legislative Assembly to be read and debated before it can be written into law. Reporting in New York, Trinity Chavez, RT.
You know, this is fascinating, especially when you compare it to the United States. Most people don't know this, but we here in the United States, were it not for immigrants who come to the United States, would have negative growth. That means most people are not breeding in the United States. They're not recreating in the United States. Joining us now, Asia-Pacific Relations Policy Specialist Sourabh Gupta. So I guess that's not the problem in India, right, Sourabh?
Oh, yeah, that's not the problem in India. India is going to become the largest country by way of population fairly soon, and it's not something that they're particularly proud about at this point of time, and they're trying to manage that difficulty, that issue.
Because they just can't keep up? In other words, it's good to have a lot of people because you have a bigger workforce, economically speaking, but you also have more people to shelter, more people, more mouths to feed, et cetera, and they're just not prepared to do that.
Not exactly. In fact, India right now has a very good demographic age profile. A lot of young people who will be in the workforce, and of course, you need to have jobs. And if you don't have those jobs, it can all go south. In fact, but the real issue actually in Uttar Pradesh, frankly, is slightly different. This is about dog whistle politics. They're going into an important state election next year. India overall and even Uttar Pradesh have done fairly well in reducing birth rates, and it's not out of whack. And so one asks, why now, and what is the purpose of this? And there's quite a story to tell in that regard.
So you say dog whistle. Dog whistle implies that they're trying to really say something to people who will hear a political message and will then vote for that person. What is the message?
Yes.
What is the message behind the dog whistle?
And the message is that let me set the context up. The chief minister has a religious background. That's why you see him draped in religious clothing. The BJP is a center-right, wing party, which is in power in Uttar Pradesh and at the center. Their hope is to champion development, but to champion development under saffron colors, Hindu nationalist colors, to show that Hindu nationalism is what brought prosperity and development. And the dog whistle element out here is that, in Uttar Pradesh, they say hush hush, that there are a lot of Muslims out here who breed at rates which are far greater than us. They even talk about there's going to be this overflow of Muslims, and therefore that we need these sort of controls and practices, which is not the case because India, as I said, has done well on population control. And that is the dog whistle which is being played out with a view to securing re-election next year at the state elections, which is going to be very tight.
So what you're saying is that Muslims are to India what Mexicans are to the United States. And population control there as an argument is the same dog whistle that in the United States we hear when we hear people say we have to secure the border.
Kind of, exactly. You're absolutely correct. And that is the fundamental thing to think through when you hear what this population draft policy that they're trying to put out. It's not essential. There's all sorts of messaging being attached out here. And unfortunately, this sort of messaging does work. It does help. And it has helped the BJP secure important critical victories in the past.
Interesting. Build that wall, stop certain people from breeding. I got it. Makes perfect sense. Thank you for taking us through that and explaining it to us in political terms. It's always good to have you.
You're welcome.
That's our news. Thanks so much for being with us. I'm Rick Sanchez. If you're looking for a newscast that's not like the others, that really drills down on issues and looks for answers, then tune us in and look for us on Portable TV. We'll see you soon.